Okay. Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight we will be learning parshat Balak. For those who are not familiar, Balak is the king, and he is terrified that Israel is coming towards the Holy Land, and he hires a heathen prophet, Bilam, who is known for his ability to curse people. And here he hires Bilam to curse the Jewish people. And the whole parsha is this whole incident. And Bilam very, very much wants to curse the Jews, but he's a very paradoxical figure that he knows that he can't go against God. But he makes every attempt to curse the Jews. But time after time, God puts blessings in his mouth. Our sages tell us, despite the fact that when we read what Bilam says, and it sounds like tremendous blessings, and they are, but his kavana was still to curse the Jews. At the end, we'll get to that. He kind of gives up, but then he gives over a prophecy of what will happen in the end of days. And that will be our second insight, what Bilam has to say about the end of days. But we're going to start with just a simple phrase. It's chapter 23, verse 3. And it says like this: V'yomer Bilam leBalak, hit yatsev al olotecha, ve'elcha ulai yikoreh Hashem likrati, u'devar ma yire'eni, v'higadati lach, v'yalech shefi. So it says that Bilam says to Balak, go and stand by your offering, your sacrifice that you have prepared, and I will go, and perhaps God will appear to me and will tell me what he wants, and I will tell you. And then it says, Vayelech Shefi. He went Shefi. Now we're going to discuss, what does this word Shefi mean? So Rashi brings Onkelos. Rashi brings the Aramaic translation, and he says like this: Kitargumo, like the translation into Aramaic says, Yechidi, alone. That's what Onkelos says, Shefim, he went alone. Rashi continues, Milashon Shofi, from this language of Shofi, V'sheket, V'enimo ela shtika, that he went alone and the only thing that he had was quiet. That's what accompanied him. He went and he was surrounded by quiet. Now, what I'm going to say now is like an aside. It's not the main idea here, but the very next verse says, Vayikar Elokim el Bilam. And God happened upon Bilam. So this word Vayikar has a very important significance in another place. The first word of the book of Leviticus is Vayikra. And God called to Moshe and invited him into the Mishkan. And Rashi brings, and in that word, Vayikra, the aleph is small. The question is, why is the aleph small? Anytime a letter is big or small, it is indicative of some additional teaching. So there are many explanations of this small aleph, but Rashi brings what we'll call the pshat, the simple understanding, the most literal is, because here it says vayikar, that God came upon Bilam. And so Moshe also wanted it not to say vayikra, but vayikar. And God said, there's no way I'm going to address you in the same way that I address Bilam. By Bilam, and Rashi explains, it's an expression of impurity. It's the expression of like almost like coincidence. It just happened that God came upon him, that God appeared to him. Whereas by Moshe, it's vayikra. He, with intent, called him. So I just wanted to point out that this phrase, vayikar Elokim el Bilam, if you look back in the first Rashi of the book of Leviticus, he mentions here the difference between Bilam and Moshe. So we have from Rashi the first explanation of what does it mean that Vayelech Shefi, he went alone to see what God would tell him. The Even Ezra gives two other explanations. As we've discussed many times, Hebrew words in general, even before you permute the letters, usually have many different meanings, all depending on the context. And sometimes even opposite meanings. Most of the time they're complementary, but sometimes there'll be even opposite meanings of the same root. So Even Ezra adds to what Rashi says and says that the root word of shefi is also connected to shif shuf, which means to polish. And he explains that you polish something when it needs polishing. In other words, there's some either blemish or it's dull or it's not shine. It needs work. It needs improvement. And it could even mean broken. But here, it's somewhat blemished. It's not shining. And the third explanation, the second of Even Ezra, means Shefi can also mean he went to a high mountain. That Shefi is sometimes used in a verb form for like an elevated place, a high mountain. And here it says, because he went somewhere. So Even Ezra says he went to like a mountaintop to see if God would reveal something to him. I just will mention in Orchard of Delights and Fruits of the Orchard, I write extensively about the character of Bilam, the difference between the prophecy of Bilam and the prophecy of Moshe. As we say, our series, Pathways of the Orchard, is always to add new insight that do not appear in the first two books of the Orchard series. So here we have three different explanations. So Rav Ginsburg, he arranges this in a model or a paradigm that we've discussed many, many times. And that is from the Baal Shem Tov, that any process will entail three different stages. Hachna'ah, which is submission, Havdalah, which is separation, and Hamtakah, which is sweetening. And so here, the first explanation, he went alone, by himself. And that is somewhat of a language of submission. He was by himself, and he wanted to see if God would reveal something to him. So he was in a submissive type of headspace. The second explanation is that something needs polishing, something needs improving. So this is the second stage, which is called separation. here is where we do the hard work of separating between the essential and what is not essential, what is needed to improve or to fulfill a task or a mission, and what will distract us, what will take us away. And the third of climbing the mountain, so Rav Ginsburg says this is connected to this idea of sweetening, because the idea of climbing the mountain and standing at the top and being able to see the incredible vista is an idea of a heightened spirituality, a sweetening. And so Rav Ginsburg takes this as not three different ideas of a process, but a general idea, not even just relating to Bilam, but just in general, these three ideas. So Rav Ginsburg says a very, very interesting thing, and then we're going to connect it to Moshe, because we're told that the Midrash says that at one point the nations of the world come to Hashem and say, if we had a prophet like Moshe, we also might be holy and good and connect to you. So it says God gave them Bilam. And we're told that on a certain level, and we will see this in the second half of the class, Bilam had very, very insightful prophecy. He did have prophecy, but his character was completely blemished. And so that's why he hired himself out to curse people, because he became corrupted through the power that he had, through the vision that he had. It's not automatic if someone reaches a high spiritual level, if they don't simultaneously fix their character, then those powers can be used in very destructive ways. So Rav Ginsburg explains that part of this process, that a person is alone. And I should point out that one of the explanations of Bilam, the Midrash reads it below Am, without a people. Bilam separated himself. He was a loner. He wasn't really connected to other people. He was a gun for hire. And that's why Uncle says that he B'yelech Shefi. Even with Balak, he had to go off by himself in order to try to get his prophetic powers working, and hopefully that God would appear to him. So Rav Ginsburg says that when a person is going through cheshbon and nefesh, through an accounting, a personal accounting, that's the idea of the second stage of polishing, shif shuf. And when a person wants to improve, elevate themselves, they have to go through what's called cheshbon and nefesh. They have to do a personal accounting. And Rav Ginsburg says a very important thing, that if a person does an really deep and honest accounting, that almost inevitably they will go through the thought that maybe everything I'm doing is not worth anything. Maybe it's all pointless. When a person like kind of breaks down their ego, they might entertain the idea, well, maybe none of it matters. I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and I really have to ask myself, does it really make a difference to anyone? Now, obviously, if you stay in that place, it's a spiritual, psychological, emotional disaster. When someone thinks that nothing I do really matters, that's a formula for adopting very, very dangerous and counterproductive lifestyles. Because if nothing matters, then I can do whatever I want because nothing matters. Now, obviously, we can't stay in this place. In a certain way, that's the place of Bilam. That's the place of Bilam, that I do what I do because nothing really matters. And that's why it says that God appeared to Bilam vayikar. And Rashi actually brings that this is the language of what's called keri. This is like spilling seed wantonly. Just in Hebrew, stam. Everything is just, I don't know how even to translate it. Everything is just not meaning anything. But when we go through this stage, then we can get through that and put it to the side and truly believe, no, God gave me a divine soul. I'm here in this world to do good. I'm in this world to do a certain task, a certain mission. I have purpose. The Jewish people have purpose. The world has purpose. And that's where I stay. And that is the climbing the mountain. In other words, to go through a stage where I might entertain the idea that nothing matters, but once I get rid of that feeling and I go through it and I examine it, the ramifications of such an attitude, and then I look at Jewish tradition, I look at the meaning of the soul, the meaning of creation, then I know that there's purpose and there's meaning to, as I said, the world, Jewish people, and each person personally. So now let's look, because Bilam is like the counter force of Moshe. Zelumat zeh asah ha'elokim. This against this is God created. The nation said, give us a prophet and we'll also be good. So he gave them Bilam, who had the same powers as Moshe, but he used them in such a terrible way. So let's look at Moshe. When Moshe killed the Egyptian and had to flee Egypt, so for 40 years, he ends up marrying Zipporah, but he was a shepherd for 40 years. Some say even more. And we know the shepherd is out in the field with their sheep most of the time. It's lots of time for hitbodedut, a lot of time for alone meditation. So Moshe went through the first stage that Onkelos says of being alone. Now we can imagine Moshe is the prince of Egypt. He, in theory, maybe would have been Pharaoh one day. He is the prince of Egypt. And in a sense, he gave it all up to protect a Jew. And then a Jew turns him in. And so we're told that there was a place that Moshe could have been very, very bitter. And we actually see this because when God appears to him at the burning bush, so Moshe says, I'm not the right person. Send someone else. They won't listen to me. But also, it's not explicit, but we're told that part of Moshe's attitude is, are these people even worthy of redemption? We have to remember that Moshe had to flee and give up his entire life because of defending a Jew. And according to one tradition, it was the very Jew that he saved who turned him in. Now, you could imagine that someone could be very bitter about this, especially if they have 40 years to think about it. So when Moshe comes to the burning bush, we could see that it would have been natural for Moshe to think nothing matters. Look at my life. Look, like he even called his first son after I'm a stranger in a strange land. He was like a fish out of water. And yet, Moshe got through it. He didn't stay in that place. He may have entertained. Obviously, we don't know what Moshe is thinking for 40 years. We're just saying that it's a possibility that he would have been somewhat bitter. And we do know from tradition that he was reluctant to lead Israel after the midot he saw, after the quality that he had experienced himself. But Moshe doesn't stay there. That's the process of separation. He was able to separate himself from these thoughts and trust that God was giving him his mission in life. And so he went with that. And where did Moshe end up? On the top of the mountain, the top of Har Sinai. That was his sweetening, that he was the one to bring down the Torah to the world. So this is all based on this word shefi. And as we saw, there were three different explanations: alone, in need of polishing, and at the top of the mountain. And we see how we can apply that to ourselves in our own journey through life. And the contrast between Bilam and Moshe, how they dealt with these different obstacles in their life and the challenges that they faced. So that is our first insight for the night. Now we're going to go towards the end of the parsha. As I mentioned, we are now going to discuss, after Bilam tries 3 different times, he really wants to curse the Jews, and yet he knows that his whole power is that he reached prophetic vision, and he's not willing to sacrifice that, and yet he's playing this little game with God. I want to curse them, but I accept that you want to bless them. Now, Balak was outraged, and he keeps on saying, I hired you to curse them, and you keep on blessing them. But like we say, the sages went through each of the blessings and found a hidden intent that Bilam had, that he meant it as a curse. It sounded like a blessing, but he was still trying to curse them. After 3 attempts, Bilam says, kind of like out of the blue, now I'm going to tell you what will happen to you. He's talking to Balak in the end of days. One second. I'm sorry, give me 1 second here. Oh, here we go. So Bilam starts and he says, Erenu velo ata. I see it, but not now. Ashurenu velo karov. I envision this, but it's not close. Derach kochav miyakov. A star will come out of Yaakov, become Shevet mi Yisrael, and here literally means either a staff or a tribe will rise in Israel. Umechatz pa'atei Moav, and he will strike Moab. V'karkar kol b'nei Shet, and he will be able to conquer all of the Semite peoples. And then he continues. He continues and he gives a prophecy about Edom and other surrounding nations. So here we're going to go to Maimonides, the Rambam. The last two chapters in the Rambam's classic work, Mishneh Torah, where he explains all of the mitzvot in the Torah, those that apply and those that don't apply today, but at one time applied. It's, of course, a classic work, one of the most important in all of Jewish history. The last chapters are called the chapters of Kings. And so the last two chapters, he discusses the future Messianic king. And here, I'm going to read in English from Rambam. And here's what he says, and then we'll discuss it. This is from, again, Rambam. In the account of Bilam, we likewise find a prophecy regarding the two messiahs or anointed ones. The first one was King David, who liberated the Jews from all their initial oppressors. The second is his descendant, the Mashiach, who will liberate all Jews in the end. Now, what's interesting here is he talks about two messianic figures. But usually when you hear that, we would associate that with Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. The tradition that when Mashiach ben David comes, he'll be preceded by Mashiach ben Yosef. But here, Rambam has a completely different understanding of two Mashiachs. He says the first one is David, and then years later, that's why we'll see now what Bilam meant. So Rambam continues. This is the prophecy that Bilam gives over. I see him, but not now. So Rambam says this applies to King David. I behold him, but not near. This applies to the Mashiach that we're still waiting for. A star shall come forth from Yaakov. He says this refers to King David. A scepter shall rise from Israel. This is the future Mashiach. He will smite the squadrons of Moab. This is King David. And then he brings a proof. We find thus that it says in the book of Shmuel that David smote Moab and measured them with a rope. In other words, he totally conquered them. Then Bilam says, he shall break down the sons of Seth, the Semitic peoples. This is the Mashiach that we wait for. We thus find that his rule shall be from sea to sea, that the Mashiach will rule from sea to sea, meaning really to encompass the whole world. Rambam continues, Edom shall be his conquest. This is talking about King David. It is thus written in Shmuel, all Edom became servants to David. And Seir, his enemy, shall be his tribute. We didn't read that, but I said that it continues with other nations. This is Mashiach of the future. It is thus foretold in Obadiah, the prophet Obadiah. Savers shall come up to Mount Zion and judge the mount of Esav, and the kingdom shall become that of God. So all of this is in the Rambam. The important idea here is the Rambam and everyone else sees that the prophecies of Bilam are true. They all came to pass through David and will come to pass through the Mashiach. And it's accepted that Bilam's prophecy is clear and true. Now the Rambam continues. Do not think that the Mashiach will have to perform signs and miracles. Now I have to say, this is the opinion of Rambam. I believe in previous classes we discussed that there are different opinions of who the Mashiach will be, when he will come, how he will come, and the whole context of the Messianic era. So the Rambam says, do not think that the Mashiach will have to perform signs and miracles. He will not necessarily change the course of nature, bring the dead back to life, or anything else like that. Now listen, this is why we're getting to this whole thing. We thus find that Rabbi Akiva, the greatest sage of the Mishnah, was willing to accept Bar Koziba as the Mashiach, or Bar Chochba, as he's known, at least until he was killed because of his sins. It was only when he was killed that they realized that they had been wrong and he was not the true Mashiach. We see, however, that the sages did not ask him for any sign or miracle. So this is very connected to the verse that Bilam begins with. Remember, he says, I see it, but not now. I view it, but not close. A star will come out of Yaakov, and a leader will rise in Israel. And so this is where we get the name Bar Chochba. Rabbi Akiva, his real name was Shimon. But Rabbi Akiva gave him the name Bar Kochba. Kochba comes from the word kochav, star. And so Rabbi Akiva was attributing this prophecy of Bilam in this parsha to this person, Shimon, and he called him Bar Chochba. So we're going to continue and discuss certain aspects of this idea. This is a very, very important part of Jewish history, because it wasn't just Rabbi Akiva who thought he was Mashiach. There is a disagreement, but some held that almost all the rabbis jumped on the bandwagon that Bar Chochba is the Mashiach. Others held that not everyone held like that. And we know from the Talmud that the different statements that telling Rabbi Akiva that you're not correct here, you're wrong. Nonetheless, Rabbi Akiva, who was the greatest of the sages, thought that Bar Chochba was the Mashiach. Now, we understand that since he didn't, in the end, fulfill the requirements of Mashiach, that when we say that Rabbi Akiva thought he was Mashiach, what it really means is that he had the potential to be Mashiach. He had the potential to be Mashiach. But as soon as Rabbi Akiva saw that he wasn't the sterling personality that he had thought or hoped, and he made some very major spiritual mistakes, that at a certain point Rabbi Akiva and all the rabbis withdrew their support for him. And in the end, Rabbi Akiva, Bar Chochba, was killed, and then he was renamed Bar Koziba. From the Kaziv means disappointment. So his whole name, Bar Chochba, was just a play on words of the prophecy of Bilam. But then they called him Bar Koziba, the son of disappointment. But let's look at this a little bit deeper. We have to understand that this whole incident happens approximately 60 years after the destruction of the temple. The temple was destroyed in 70 CE, Common Era. And approximately 60 years later, the Roman rule was terribly harsh. Not only was the temple destroyed, but millions of people were killed. It was a total bloodbath, and the Romans ruled with an iron fist. And Bar Kokhba led a revolt against Rome. There were certain rabbis that thought it was hopeless, that we just had to, let's call it, grin and bear it, that we didn't have the strength after the terrible events of 60 years before to seriously fight back. Rome is the greatest empire in the world. Bar Kokhba was a very charismatic person, and he gathered, we're told, up to 400,000 soldiers, and he actually defeated Rome. He basically kicked Rome out of Israel. He reestablished the kingdom of Israel, and according to many opinions, he was planning and was in the process of rebuilding the temple. And then the whole thing falls apart, the different versions of how it fell apart. So one of the expressions that's used for Rabbi Akiva's relationship with Bar Kokhba was that he was nosei kelav. He was his arms bearer, bearer. That he, as it were, he like served Bar Kokhba, and he carried his spear, his bow and arrow, his sword. That's the simple idea. Rav Ginsburg explains that kelav is the same word as kli, vessel, and that Rabbi Akiva saw that the soul of Bar Kokhba was from the world of Tohu, was from, in a sense, a previous world, a chaotic world, but the lights were phenomenal. We've discussed this many times, that the previous world of Tohu shattered. That's where what's called the breaking of the vessel, Shvirat HaKelim, happens in Olam HaTohu. And that this world is made up of the broken shards and the fallen light of a previous world. Rabbi Akiva saw that the soul of Bar Kokhba came from Olam HaTohu, came from a place of tremendous light. So when it says that he was his arms bearer, nosei kelav, Rav Ginsburg explains that Rabbi Akiva was trying to fix him, was trying to create a proper vessel for his tremendous light and his charismatic personality. And this is very connected to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he told all of his followers that he had done everything he could to bring Mashiach, and now it's in every individual's hand to try to bring Mashiach. And he revealed that one of the secrets of bringing Mashiach is to take the lights of Tohu and create vessels in this world of Olam HaTikun. In other words, to make vessels for tremendous light. And that is part of the work that has to be done to bring Mashiach. So Rabbi Akiva was trying to do that. He was trying to do that. And the question is why? Why then did he think that a Mashiach could come? And so it's explained that Rabbi Akiva was not a prophet, but he he did have prophetic vision, and he saw that tremendous changes were about to occur in the world. And he saw that if Israel could overcome Rome, that Rome was ripe for a spiritual revolution. We have to understand at this part of history, 10% of Rome is Jewish, 10% of Alexandria, the greatest city of the Roman Empire other than Rome, is 10% Jewish. Jewish influence was extremely strong in the Roman Empire, even though they had destroyed the temple and were ruling with a harsh hand. Nonetheless, Jewish influence in Rome was tremendous. And we know from the Talmud scores of stories of the sages who would go to Rome for politics, to nullify a decree or to find ways to work with Rome over many centuries. Rabbi Akiva saw that Rome was ripe for a spiritual revolution, and he thought the time had come. But just like Bilam said, I see it, but it's not close. It's in the future. Rabbi Akiva was hoping he could make it happen right then. So the amazing thing is that approximately around 200 years later, the Roman Empire in mass adopts Christianity. The whole empire, following the lead of the Caesar, become Christians. And Rabbi Akiva saw that they were ripe for a spiritual revolution, and he was hoping it would be Judaism, not Christianity. But the time wasn't right. Time wasn't right. Now, a lot of this has to do with the soul of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, the letters of Akiva are almost the same as Yaakov. And when it says Yaakov gets his name from holding on to the heel, Ekev means heel, Yaakov means heel. He was holding on to Esav's heel as they came out of the womb. This is very, very symbolic. But one of the explanations is, and we'll just jump ahead where it says that Yitzchak loved Esav because hunt was in his mouth. And so it's explained, what does it mean that hunt was in his mouth? That Yitzchak saw tremendous potential in Esav. And specifically, he saw the souls of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir both come from families of converts, from the line of Esav. But Yaakov is holding on to the heel of Esav in a sense to indicate, I am more like Akiva than you are. And that's what we're told. The Arizal reveals that a substantial part of Rabbi Akiva's soul was from Yaakov Avinu. And this explains, we know from tradition that Christianity comes from Esav, that Rome comes from Esav, and Christianity then comes from Rome. And so Yaakov and Esav were in the womb together. And so there's this deep love-hate relationship between Yaakov and Esav throughout all of history. And here we quoted, the Rambam quotes from Avadia, that when Mashiach comes, saviors will come up on Mount Zion and judge the mountain of Esav. And then God will be king of the whole world. So this love-hate relationship manifests in Rabbi Akiva in quite an amazing way, that his love affair with his wife, Rachel, is classic. But at a certain point, she passed away. And it's an incredible story. Rabbi Akiva ends up marrying a Roman, a woman from the aristocracy of Rome who converts. And Rabbi Akiva marries her. So there's this deep love-hate relationship. But all of this really is to try to explain the prophecy of Bilam in this parsha. We didn't go through the whole prophecy. He also prophesizes against Amalek and says, Amalek, in the end, you'll be wiped out. You'll be finished. And so the point here is that Bilam's prophecies are accepted as true. They're accepted as true, especially these about what will occur in the end of days. And he actually uses that phrase when he says to Balak, I'll tell you what will happen in the end of days. This is very similar to when Yaakov gathers his sons together, and he wanted to reveal what he told them, I'm gathering you together to reveal what will happen in the end of days. But then we're told that the Shekhinah left him. And here, though, Bilam sees clearly. Now, we have a tradition that Yaakov also saw clearly, but when the Shekhinah left him, he understood it was not proper to reveal it openly at that time. Nonetheless, in many of the blessings that Yaakov gives his sons, he hides the prophecies of the end of days in the blessings. So here, I want to mention something which is quite interesting, is that the first chief rabbi of, then it was called Palestine, of Israel was Rav Kook. Rav Kook was an incredible rabbi, and he was the first chief rabbi. He was very controversial within the religious world. And the reason is that he embraced the secular settlers who were settling Eretz Israel. They were the believers in Zionism. For those who know a little bit about the history of Israel, the last 140 years, there were many disagreements in the religious world how to relate to Zionism, how to relate to the return to Israel. Many religious, we'll say, became Zionist, remained religious. Other religious really didn't want to have anything to do with Zionism because it was secular. There was no Torah involved in it. Rav Kook, he was a tremendous scholar and a mystic. And he, we're going to say, very much like Rabbi Akiva, he saw great sparks of light in this desire of secular Zionism to return to Israel. He didn't compromise his religious standards at all, but he saw kind of like the lights of Tohu. And he wanted, like Rabbi Akiva, he wanted to make vessels that could hold this light. That's why he was very controversial in the religious world. But Rav Kook was a tremendous force in the creation of the state of Israel. In religious Zionism to this day is really based very much on the teachings of Rav Kook. The yeshiva of Rav Kook and his son are the pillars of religious Zionism to this day. But I just find it very, very interesting that there's 2,000 years separating Rabbi Akiva from Rav Kook, but there's a similar vision here, a similar idea. Rav Kook was very messianic. He saw the return to Zion in very, very messianic terms, and all of religious Zionism sees it similarly to this day. Okay, so I think we've done somewhat justice to understanding these prophecies of Bilam. And I will end with a blessing that Bilam saw a vision of Mashiach coming. He saw that Amalek would be destroyed eventually. He saw that the messianic figure would, in a sense, conquer the world and bring everyone together in the belief, in the service, in the love of God. We're living in awesome times right now, absolutely awesome times. And may it be that these prophecies, which were considered true and correct by our great sages, that we see them fully manifest in our day. L'chaim, everyone, l'chaim.